An exciting story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She rejected him 6 times, and even though he was a powerful millionaire, he came back a 7th time. But this time, he didn't bring flowers. He came to steal a kiss. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised. If you like love stories and romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing, the smell of old paper and aged wood permeated every corner of the Oak Ridge Municipal Library like a nostalgic perfume that Helena Winters had learned to call home. It was Wednesday morning, and the fine March rain tapped against the colonial windows of the 18th century mansion, creating a melancholy symphony that she knew by heart. Her fingers glided with surgical precision over the yellowed pages of a 19th century manuscript, each movement calculated to preserve the fragility of time crystallized in ink and paper. Helena wasn't from Oak Ridge. In fact, she wasn't from anywhere in particular. The daughter of an American diplomat who had fallen from grace after a scandal involving corruption at a European embassy, and of a classical pianist who simply disappeared one winter morning without even leaving a note, she had learned early on that roots were a luxury she couldn't afford. At 28, she carried in her honey-colored eyes an ancient sadness, the kind of melancholy that comes from someone who has seen too much and chosen silence as a form of survival. The mansion that housed the library was one of those buildings that seemed to hold secrets in its walls. 3 floors of stone and wood, with staircases that creaked under the weight of centuries, and corridors that lost themselves in dark corners where electric light never fully reached. Helena had arrived there 3 years ago after a succession of temporary jobs in museums and libraries in small towns, always running from something she could never completely name. Mrs. Eleanor, the head librarian, a lady in her 60s with grey hair always pulled back in a severe bun, had hired her without asking too many questions. It was as if she recognized in Helena the same kind of wounded soul that sought refuge among books and silence. "You have the hands of someone who knows how to care for what is fragile," she had said on the day of the interview, observing how Helena handled a rare edition of Mark Twain, "and the eyes of someone who understands that some things need to be preserved, even when the world wants to forget them." Helena's routine was meticulously organized. She always arrived at 7 in the morning, half an hour before the library, opened to the public, to have a few moments alone with the books. She checked the temperature and humidity of the storage areas, catalogued recent donations, and spent most of the day in the restoration laboratory, a small room on the 2nd floor, where she had complete control over her environment. It was there that she felt safest, surrounded by precise tools, chemicals with complicated names, and the certainty that each gesture had a clear purpose. The people of Oak Ridge knew her as the quiet library girl, always polite but distant, who lived alone in a small apartment on Maple Street and never participated in local festivities. Some said she had lost her family in an accident. Others whispered that she was hiding from some violent ex-boyfriend. The truth was that Helena had become an expert at being invisible, a skill she had developed since childhood, when she learned that drawing too much attention could be dangerous. On that Wednesday morning, while working on restoring a travel diary of an 18th century miner, Helena felt a subtle change in the air. It was as if a storm was approaching, although the sky was only cloudy. Mrs. Eleanor had mentioned the day before that they would receive a visit from a businessman interested in making a significant donation to the library, but Helena hadn't paid much attention. Donors occasionally appeared, usually elderly people wanting to get rid of inherited libraries or local businessmen seeking tax benefits. The sound of a car door slamming in the street made her look up from the magnifying glass. Through the laboratory window, she could see a black BMW parked in front of the mansion, completely out of place among the Fords and Hondas that normally circulated there. A man stepped out of the car, and even from a distance, Helena felt something contract in her stomach. There was a natural authority in his movements, a confidence that only comes from someone who is accustomed to having the world bend to his. Will Ethan Lancaster was 42 years old and had spent the last 20 building a financial empire that extended throughout the southeastern United States. Born in Atlanta, the son of a stock market broker and an English literature professor, he had learned early to combine the aggressiveness of business with a veneer of cultural sophistication that opened doors in any social circle. Tall, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, a square jaw, and eyes of such an intense blue that they seemed capable of penetrating any mask, Ethan was the type of man women desired and other men feared. But behind the custom Italian suits and reputation as a ruthless negotiator, there were wounds that had never completely healed. Ethan carried secrets that kept him awake in the early hours of Atlanta nights, secrets that made him avoid serious relationships and take refuge in work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. There were women in his life, of course, always were. Ambitious executives, bored socialites, models seeking financial stability, but they were all temporary, carefully selected distractions that never came too close to who he really was. The decision to come personally to Oak Ridge had been made the night before during a meeting with his urban development team. The project was ambitious: to transform the entire central area of the town into a luxury tourist complex with boutique hotels, sophisticated restaurants, and art galleries. The library mansion was right in the center of the land they needed to acquire, and the owners were resistant to previous offers. Ethan had learned that some problems required his personal presence, especially when they involved people who weren't easily impressed by money. Upon entering the library, Ethan was greeted by Mrs. Eleanor, who led him through the history-filled corridors to her office on the first floor. The old librarian was clearly nervous in his presence, her hands trembling slightly as she served coffee in porcelain cups that were probably older than the Republic. Ethan listened with feigned patience as she talked about the historical importance of the collection, the education programs for the local community, and the cultural responsibility they carried. "I completely understand your concerns, Mrs. Eleanor," said Ethan, his voice carrying that tone of gentle authority he had perfected over the years. "My proposal doesn't involve destroying the collection. On the contrary, we're prepared to build a modern library in another location in town, with much more resources and technology. And of course, there's the matter of financial compensation, which would be quite generous." It was then that Helena appeared at the office door. She had come down to get some chemicals from the first-floor storage when she heard voices in Mrs. Eleanor's office. At first, she tried to pass unnoticed, but something in the man's voice made her stop. It was a voice that carried power, but also a subtle melancholy that she immediately recognized. Curious despite herself, she approached the partially open door. The first visual contact between Helena and Ethan lasted only a few seconds, but it was as if time stopped. She stood at the threshold of the door, dressed in a simple white blouse and a navy blue midi skirt, brown hair tied in a low ponytail, no makeup except for a discreet gloss on her lips. There was nothing particularly striking about her appearance, except for her eyes. Those honey-colored eyes that seemed to carry an ancient sadness, a depth that made one think of dark lakes where secrets slept at the bottom. Ethan felt something move in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. It was as if he recognized something in her, an impossible familiarity that left him momentarily speechless. Helena, in turn, felt her blood freeze in her veins. There was something about that man that frightened her, not because he seemed dangerous, but because he seemed capable of seeing through the defenses she had spent years building. "Ah, Helena," said Mrs. Eleanor, clearly relieved by the interruption. "Come meet Mr. Lancaster. Helena is our head restorer, responsible for much of the preservation of our collection." Helena forced a polite smile and extended her hand, hoping that Ethan wouldn't notice how she trembled slightly. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Lancaster." Ethan's hand was warm and firm, and he held hers a little longer than would be socially appropriate. "The pleasure is all mine, Helena. Mrs. Eleanor was telling me about the exceptional work you do here. It must be fascinating to work with history every day." "It is," she replied, withdrawing her hand and crossing her arms in an almost imperceptible, defensive posture. "Each book has its own history, its own secrets. It's our job to preserve them for future generations." There was something in the way she said secrets that made Ethan narrow his eyes slightly. It was as if she were testing him, sending a coded message that only he could understand. "Secrets," can be fascinating, he responded, his voice dropping a tone. But sometimes they can also be dangerous when they remain buried for too long. Helena felt a shiver run down her spine. It was impossible that he knew anything about her past, but there was something in the way he looked at her that suggested otherwise. Fortunately, in the library, the only secrets we keep are academic, she said, forcing a casual tone. Nothing very exciting for someone from the business world. You'd be surprised at what I find exciting, Ethan replied, and Helena had the impression that they were no longer talking about books. Mrs. Eleanor, sensing the growing tension in the room, nervously cleared her throat. Helena, could you show Mr. Lancaster our collection of rare manuscripts? I'm sure he would be impressed with what we've managed to preserve over the years. Of course, Helena said, although every instinct in her body screamed for her to flee. If you would like to follow me. The next 20 minutes were a subtle torture. Helena led Ethan through the corridors of the library, showing the different sections, explaining the processes of cataloguing and preservation, trying to maintain a professional tone, while feeling the constant weight of his gaze upon her. He asked intelligent questions, demonstrating a surprising knowledge of American literature and history. But Helena could feel that his attention wasn't really on the books. In the restoration laboratory, Helena relaxed slightly. This was her territory, where she felt in control. She showed Ethan some of the ongoing projects, explaining the techniques of paper cleaning, acid neutralization, the methods of sewing for rebinding. Her hands moved with precision over the instruments, and for the first time since he arrived, she seemed genuinely at ease. You're very talented, Ethan said, observing how she delicately handled the pages of a 17th-century book. You must have studied this for years. History degree from UVA, specialization in conservation from Columbia, Helena responded automatically, then immediately regretted giving personal information. And you? Have you always worked in urban development? Ethan smiled, but there was something sad in his expression. I started in finance, but I realized I preferred building new things to simply moving money from one place to another. There's something satisfying about taking an abandoned space and transforming it into something that can benefit an entire community. And you think destroying a century-old library benefits the community? Helena asked, unable to hide the tone of challenge in her voice. I don't see it as destruction, Ethan responded calmly. I see it as evolution. The world changes, Helena. People have different needs today. A modern library with adequate technology can serve many more people than this mansion that can barely keep its structure standing. Some things have value beyond functionality, Helena replied, her eyes shining with a passion that surprised her. History isn't something you can simply transfer from one place to another. It's in the walls, in the smell, in the way light enters through the windows. When you destroy that, you destroy something irreplaceable. Ethan studied her for a moment, impressed by the intensity of her response. You speak like someone who understands irreplaceable loss. The question hit Helena like a punch to the stomach. For a moment her defenses wavered, and Ethan could see through the carefully constructed mask a deep and ancient pain. It was exactly what he had suspected. There was more to Helena than appeared, layers of personal history that she protected with fierce determination. Everyone understands loss, Helena finally said, her voice low and controlled. The difference is that some of us learn to value what we still have. Before Ethan could respond, Mrs. Eleanor appeared at the laboratory door, announcing that she needed to lock the library for lunch. The tension between Helena and Ethan was palpable, an electric current that seemed to charge the air between them. As they said goodbye, Ethan again held Helena's hand longer than necessary. It was a pleasure to meet you, Helena, he said, his voice carrying an unspoken promise. I'm sure we'll see each other again soon. I don't know if that would be appropriate, Helena responded, trying to keep her voice steady. Appropriate is an interesting word, Ethan said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes the most important things in life are precisely the least appropriate. After he left, Helena stood in the laboratory for long minutes, trying to process what had happened. There was something deeply disturbing about Ethan Lancaster, something that went beyond his obvious intention to buy the library's land. The way he looked at her, as if he knew her from somewhere she couldn't remember. The questions that seemed to have double meanings, the impossible familiarity she felt in his presence. That night, in her small apartment, Helena couldn't concentrate on anything. She tried to read, watch television, organize some personal papers, but her mind kept returning to those intense blue eyes and the feeling that her carefully organized life was about to be turned upside down. Ethan, meanwhile, had cancelled his meetings in Richmond and decided to spend the night in Oak Ridge. From his hotel room, a suite in a boutique hotel in the historic center, he could see the lights of the old town through the window, but his mind wasn't on the landscape. It was on Helena Winters, on the honey-colored eyes that had awakened memories he thought he had buried forever. There was something about her that intrigued him beyond the obvious physical attraction. It was the way she moved, as if she were always ready to flee, the way she protected her privacy, as if she carried secrets that could destroy her if they were revealed. And mainly, there was something familiar in those eyes, a sadness that echoed that of another woman he had known many years ago. The next morning, Ethan appeared again at the library. This time, he told Mrs. Eleanor that he would like to examine the collection more closely before making a final decision on the proposal. It was a transparent excuse, and Helena knew it the moment she saw him enter the laboratory where she worked. "Good morning, Helena," he said, his voice carrying that same gentle authority as the day before. "Mr. Lancaster," she responded, not raising her eyes from the manuscript she was working on. "Can I help you with something specific today?" "Actually, yes," Ethan said, approaching the table where she worked. "I'm interested in knowing more about the criteria you use to determine which materials deserve to be preserved. It must be a complex process, deciding what's worth saving and what should be left behind." Helena finally looked at him, and again felt that disturbing electric current. "It's not a question of merit," she said carefully. "Each document has its historical value, even if it's not immediately obvious. Our responsibility is to preserve everything that reaches us." "Even when preserving something can be painful?" Ethan asked, his voice lowering to a more intimate tone. "Even when it would be easier to simply let the past rest in peace?" Helena felt her breathing accelerate. It was impossible that this conversation was really about library procedures. "The past doesn't rest in peace, just because we choose to. Ignore it," she said, her words carrying more weight than she intended. "It remains there in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return." "Very wise," Ethan said, his eyes never leaving her face. "And what do you do when the past finally decides to return? When the shadows start to take shape?" "You face it," Helena responded, although her voice trembled slightly. "There's no other choice." Ethan smiled then, but it was a smile laden with a sadness that Helena immediately recognized. It was the same kind of melancholy she saw in the mirror every morning, the mark of someone who had lost something fundamental and never managed to fully recover. "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" he asked suddenly, the question so direct that Helena was speechless for a moment. "I don't think that would be appropriate," she finally said. "There's that word again," Ethan said, moving even closer. "Appropriate, as if what we feel could be controlled by social rules." "I don't know what you're talking about," Helena lied, but they both knew she was lying. "All right," Ethan said, retreating slightly, "but the offer stands. I'll be at the Oak and Vine restaurant at 8 o'clock. If you change your mind, you'll be very welcome." After he left, Helena spent the rest of the day in a state of agitation that she couldn't disguise. Mrs. Eleanor commented that she seemed distracted, and Helena invented an excuse about problems with the humidification system. In reality, she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's proposal, the way he looked at her, the disturbing sensation that he knew something about her that she herself had forgotten. At 7:30 in the evening, Helena found herself standing in front of her bedroom closet, looking at her clothes as if she could find in them the answer to the dilemma she faced. It was madness to even consider meeting Ethan Lancaster. He was clearly a dangerous man, not in the physical sense, but in the sense that he had the power to destroy the carefully controlled life she had built. But there was something stronger than prudence pulling her toward that restaurant. It was the same curiosity that made her restore old manuscripts, the need to discover what was hidden beneath the layers of time and silence. And there was also, although she was reluctant to admit it, an intense physical attraction that surprised her with its strength. At 8:15, Helena pushed open the door of the Oak and Vine, an elegant restaurant installed in an 18th-century colonial mansion. Ethan was seated at a corner table, already with a glass of red wine in his hands, and the smile that lit up his face when he saw her enter was genuine enough to make her heart dangerously accelerate. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come," he said, standing up to pull out the chair for her. "I was thinking the same thing," Helena admitted, accepting the glass of wine he offered. Dinner was a careful dance of questions and answers, each trying to discover the other's secrets without revealing too much of themselves. Ethan talked about his business, about the satisfaction of transforming urban spaces, about the loneliness that came with financial success. Helena talked about her love of books, about the peace she found in restoration work, about the beauty of preserving stories that might be lost forever. But beneath the civilized conversation, there was a current of sexual tension that made each accidental touch electrically charged. Helena felt attracted to Ethan in a way she hadn't experienced in years, an attraction that went beyond the physical and touched something deep and primitive within her. "Why did you really come to Oakridge?" she asked when dessert arrived, the wine having lowered her defenses enough for her to ask the question that tormented her. Ethan studied her for a long moment before answering. "Officially, to evaluate the feasibility of the development project." "And unofficially?" "Unofficially." He paused as if carefully weighing his words. "I was looking for something I lost a long time ago, and I think I found it." "What did you lose?" Helena asked, although part of her feared the answer. "The ability to feel," Ethan said simply. "For years I've been living as if I were anesthetized, going through the motions of life without really being present. And then I meet you, and suddenly I feel as if I'm waking up from a very long dream." Helena felt her heart accelerate. It was too intense a declaration, too intimate for someone she had known for only 2 days. And yet there was a sincerity in his voice that made her believe he was telling the truth. "You don't know me," she said softly. "You don't know anything about me." "I know more than you imagine," Ethan responded, and there was something in his eyes that made her shudder. "I know that you're hiding from something. I know there's a sadness in you that goes far beyond normal melancholy. And I know that you feel the same connection that I feel, even if it scares you." Helena opened her mouth to deny it, but couldn't form the words. It was true, everything he had said. There was a connection between them that defied any rational explanation, a familiarity that seemed to come from much more than 2 days of acquaintance. "This is madness," she whispered. "Perhaps," Ethan agreed. "But sometimes madness is the only thing that makes sense." They finished dinner in a silence laden with tension, and when Ethan offered to accompany her home, Helena didn't protest. The walk through the cobblestone streets of Oakridge was made in a heavy silence, both aware that they were approaching a decisive moment. In front of the building where Helena lived, they stopped under the yellow light of an old lamp-post. The rain had started again, a fine drizzle that created a mystical halo around the light. "Helena," Ethan said, his voice hoarse, "I know this is too fast, too intense, but I need you to know that what I'm feeling for you is real, more real than anything I've felt in years." She looked at him, seeing in the faint light of the lamppost the vulnerability he tried to hide. Behind his business confidence, he was a complex man, carrying his own secrets and wounds, and that attracted her in a way she knew was dangerous. "Ethan," she began, but he interrupted her by moving closer until she could feel the heat of his body. "Don't say anything now," he whispered. "Just let me feel this for a moment longer." And then he kissed her. It was a soft kiss at first, almost hesitant, as if he were testing her reaction. But when Helena responded, when her lips opened under his, and her hands clutched at the lapel of his coat, the kiss deepened, carrying all the tension and desire that had built up between them. Helena felt as if she were drowning, and being saved at the same time. It had been years since she had felt anything so intense, since she had allowed herself to be vulnerable enough for a real connection. And yet there she was, kissing a man she had known for 2 days as if her life depended on it. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Helena could see in her own eyes reflected in his the same confusion and desire she felt. "Good night, Helena," Ethan said, his voice laden with unspoken promises. "Good night," she managed to respond, though her voice was little more than a whisper. She watched him walk away in the rain, her hands still trembling from the kiss, her mind a confusion of contradictory emotions. She knew she had crossed a line from which there would be no return, that she had opened herself up to possibilities that could destroy the peace she had managed to build. And yet, as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Helena couldn't bring herself to regret it. For the first time in years, she felt alive, truly alive, and that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The fee. Next morning, when she arrived at the library, Helena found something on her desk that made her stop abruptly. It was a book she had never seen before, bound in dark leather and visibly old. There was no library label, no indication of how it had gotten there. With trembling hands, she opened the book and discovered that it was a diary. The pages were yellowed by time, and many had been torn out, leaving only traces of paper stuck to the binding. But what made her stop breathing was the name underlined in red pen on the first page, Emily Winters, her mother. And then, hidden among the remaining pages, she found a letter. A letter signed by Emily, addressed to someone identified only as Carson, dated just 6 months before her disappearance. Helena felt the world spin around her as she read the first lines. "My love, I know our time is running out. He discovered about us, about her. I need to protect her even if it means letting her go." The sound of footsteps in the corridor made her look up quickly, closing the diary and hiding it in the drawer of her desk. Mrs. Eleanor appeared at the door, looking agitated. "Helena, dear, we have a problem," she said. "Mr. Lancaster is here again, and this time he came with lawyers. They're talking about court orders, expropriation. I think the situation is getting serious." Helena managed to nod and mutter some reassuring words, but her mind was completely focused on the diary hidden in her drawer. No one could know about the existence of that diary, no one except... It was impossible. But as the pieces began to fit together in her mind, Helena began to understand that perhaps nothing that had happened in the last few days was a coincidence. Perhaps Ethan Lancaster hadn't come to Oakridge just to buy a piece of land. Perhaps he had been looking for her all along. Helena spent the rest of the morning in a state of controlled paralysis, pretending to work on the 18th century manuscript while her mind spun in increasingly tight circles around the diary hidden in her drawer. Each sound of footsteps in the corridor made her start. Each unfamiliar voice made her imagine that Ethan was approaching. The weight of the discovery was like a stone in her stomach, heavy and cold, threatening to destroy the fragile foundations of peace she had built over the last 3 years. The voices coming from the first floor confirmed what Mrs. Eleanor had said. Ethan was indeed there with lawyers, and the tone of the conversations, even filtered through the thick walls of the colonial mansion, carried an urgency that hadn't existed in the previous days. Helena could distinguish his voice among the others, that deep and authoritative timbre that she had learned to recognize with a disturbing precision. There were moments when the voice rose slightly, not exactly anger, but a firmness that suggested he wasn't accustomed to having his wishes denied. Around noon, when the sound of voices finally ceased and Helena heard the sound of cars departing, she allowed herself to breathe again. Mrs. Eleanor appeared at the laboratory door a few minutes later, looking 10 years older than in the morning, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her glasses. "They're gone," said the old librarian, her voice laden with an exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. "For now. But Helena, dear, I think we're facing something much bigger than we imagined." Helena looked up from the manuscript, forcing an expression of professional interest while her heart hammered against her ribs. What happened exactly? The lawyers brought documents, official papers. They're claiming that the mansion has structural problems that represent a risk to public safety. They want a complete inspection from civil defense, engineering assessments, a whole series of procedures that could take months. Mrs. Eleanor sat heavily in the chair next to Helena's desk. And the worst part is that Mr. Lancaster didn't even say goodbye. He just left with the lawyers as if we were just obstacles to be removed. Helena felt a sharp pang in her chest, a mixture of anger and disillusionment that surprised her with its intensity. The night before, in Ethan's arms, under the rain of Oakridge, she had allowed herself to believe that there was something real between them. The kiss had been too intense, laden with an emotion too genuine to be just an act. And yet there was the evidence that perhaps she had been just another piece in a game she didn't completely understand. "Maybe it's better this way," Helena said, her voice more controlled than she expected. "At least now we know exactly where we stand." "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Eleanor said, her expression softening, "I saw how you looked at each other yesterday. There was something there, something real. Men like Mr. Lancaster don't fake that kind of intensity." Helena almost smiled at the old librarian's naivete. If she knew about the diary, about the letters, about the impossible coincidence that had brought Ethan Lancaster exactly to where she was hiding, perhaps she would think differently. But Helena couldn't tell anyone about the diary, not yet. First, she needed to understand what it meant, who was the E in her mother's letters, and mainly, how Ethan had managed to get his hands on those pages. The rest of the day passed in a haze of forced routine. Helena catalogued some newly donated books, answered emails about research requests, organized materials for a lecture on conservation she would give at the local university the following week. But her mind was elsewhere, lost in fragmented memories of her childhood that she had spent years trying to forget. Emily Winters had disappeared when Helena was 8 years old. It hadn't been a sudden disappearance, actually. There were signs, periods of absence that became increasingly longer, conversations in low voices on the phone that stopped abruptly when Helena entered the room, a growing sadness in her mother's eyes that not even a child could ignore. And then, on a winter morning in Virginia, Helena had woken up to discover that her mother had left during the night, leaving only a letter saying she needed to go away for a while, but would return when she could. She never returned. Her father, Michael Winters, had faced the corruption scandal just 6 months later. The investigations revealed a complex scheme of bribes involving contracts for works at American embassies abroad, and although Michael swore innocence, the evidence was overwhelming. His diplomatic career was destroyed, his reputation ruined, and Helena, at 9, found herself living in a succession of distant relatives' homes while her father fought against legal proceedings and depression. There were always whispers about Emily, speculations about her disappearance being related to the scandal in some way. Some said she had fled with compromising information that could clear Michael's name. Others suggested that she herself was involved in the corruption scheme and had disappeared to avoid prison. But Helena, even as a child, knew there was something deeper, something personal behind her mother's disappearance. Now, 20 years later, looking at the diary hidden in her drawer, Helena began to understand that perhaps she had never really known her mother. The Emily she remembered was a gentle, melancholic woman who spent hours at the piano playing pieces by Chopin and looking out the window as if waiting for someone who never arrived. But the Emily of the letters was different, passionate, desperate, involved in something that terrified and excited her at the same time. At 6 in the evening, when the library closed, Helena finally allowed herself to examine the diary more closely. She locked herself in the laboratory and spread the remaining pages on the table, under the strong light of the work lamp. Her mother's handwriting was unmistakable, that elegant calligraphy that Helena remembered from birthday cards and notes, left on the refrigerator, but the content of the letters was of an intimacy that made her blush. "My beloved E, I can't stop thinking about you, about the way your hands trembled when you touched me for the first time. I know this is madness, I know we're playing with fire, but I can't stay away. You awaken things in me that I thought were dead for years." Helena stopped reading, feeling like an intruder in her mother's intimacy. But there was something in the dates of the letters that intrigued her. They were from a specific period, all concentrated between March and September of a year she vaguely remembered as being particularly difficult at home. Her father was traveling a lot for work, her mother seemed distant and nervous, and there was a tension in the air that even a 7-year-old child could feel. She continued reading, skipping the more intimate parts and focusing on the details. That might give clues about the identity of the mysterious E. There were references to meetings at a hotel in downtown Virginia, to walks at a local park, to a promise that they would run away together as soon as he resolved the problems with the business, and then in the last letters a tone of growing desperation. He knows Michael discovered about us. I don't know how, but last night he confronted me. He didn't say your name, but I know he knows. And worse, I think he knows about the documents you showed me. I'm afraid not for myself, but for Helena. She's just a child. She can't become a victim of our mistakes. The last letter was dated just a week before Emily's disappearance. Helena read it 3 times before she could fully process its content. My love, this will be my last letter. He gave me an ultimatum. Either I disappear silently, or Helena pays the price for our sins. I can't risk her life for our happiness. I'm leaving tomorrow, and you must not look for me. Take care of her if you can, but from a distance. She must never know the truth about us, about what we did. Promise me this. Promise me that my daughter will have the chance of a normal life, free from the shadows that we created. I will always love you, but this is the end. Helena felt tears burning her eyes as she finished reading. For all these years, she had carried a dull anger against her mother for abandoning her, for choosing to disappear instead of fighting for the family. Now discovering that Emily had sacrificed her own happiness to protect her daughter, Helena felt as if the ground were moving beneath her feet. But there was still the most important question. Who was E? And how had Ethan Lancaster managed to get his hands on that diary? The sound of footsteps in the corridor made her raise her head abruptly. It was impossible that anyone would be in the library at that hour. Mrs. Eleanor had left at 5, as always, and Helena was sure she had locked the main door. Quickly, she put the letters back in the diary and hid it again in the drawer, her heart accelerating with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The footsteps stopped in front of the laboratory door. Helena? Ethan's voice was low, almost a whisper. I know you're in there. She hesitated for a moment, considering pretending she wasn't there, but she knew it wouldn't help. He had managed to enter the library, which meant he had keys or a skill for opening locks that she preferred not to investigate. And besides, part of her, the part that had responded to his kiss the night before, wanted to confront him, wanted the answers that only he could give. The door is open, she finally said. Ethan entered slowly, as if he were approaching a wounded animal. There was something different about him today, a tension that hadn't existed in the previous days. He was still wearing an expensive suit, but the tie was loose, the hair slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it several times. You found the diary, he said. It wasn't a question. Helena stared at him for a long moment, trying to read something in his expression that might give a clue about his intentions. It was you who put it on my desk. Yes. Why? Ethan approached the table, but stopped at a respectful distance, as if he knew she was ready to flee at any moment. Because you deserve to know the truth about your mother, and because I couldn't carry this weight alone anymore. What weight? Helena asked, although part of her already suspected the answer. The weight of having loved Emily Winters, Ethan said, his voice laden with a pain he didn't try to hide, and the weight of having lost both her and you because of my own cowardice. Helena felt the air leave her lungs at once. It was one thing to suspect, another completely different to hear the confirmation. You are the E of the letters. Yes. You had an affair with my mother. Yes. 20 years ago. Yes. The simplicity of Ethan's answers, the way he didn't try to justify or explain himself, made Helena's anger explode in a way that surprised her. And now you appear here in my life, pretending you don't know me, seducing me as if I were just another conquest? She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. "What kind of man does that?" "A desperate man," Ethan responded, his voice low but firm. "A man who spent 20 years looking for a way to fix the biggest mistake of his life." "Mistake?" Helena laughed, but it was a bitter sound without humor. "Destroying my family was just a mistake for you?" "Not destroying your family was the mistake," Ethan said, taking a step toward her. "The mistake was letting fear paralyze me. The mistake was accepting your father's threats and distancing myself from Emily when she needed me most. The mistake was spending 20 years without having the courage to look for you." Helena stared at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes but feeling unable to fully process what he was saying. "My father threatened you." "Your father discovered our relationship through a private detective he had hired. He knew about the documents I had shown Emily, papers that could implicate him even more deeply in the corruption scandal. Michael gave me a choice: disappear silently or see both Emily and you destroyed along with him." Ethan ran his hand through his hair, an expression of self-reproach crossing his face. "I chose the cowardly path. I thought I was protecting you. Both. But in reality I was only protecting myself." "And my mother? What happened to her after you distanced yourself?" "She disappeared 3 weeks later. I received a letter from her, very similar to the one you read, telling me it was the end and that I shouldn't look for her. I spent the next 5 years hiring private detectives, following false leads, trying to find her, but Emily had simply evaporated." Helena felt as if she were hearing the story of other people, not of her own. Family. The mother, she remembered, the melancholic woman who played the piano and looked out the window, had been capable of a love so intense that she was willing to sacrifice everything for it. And the man in front of her, whom she had met only 3 days ago but who seemed familiar in a disturbing way, had been the obsession that destroyed her family. "You never found her?" "No," Ethan said, and there was such a deep pain in his voice that Helena felt her heart involuntarily contract. "But I found you." "By chance," Helena said, although she knew it wasn't true the moment the words left her mouth. "It wasn't by chance," Ethan confirmed. "I knew you were here. I've been following your life from a distance for years, making sure you were safe, that you had what you needed. When I learned that the library was having financial problems, that the mansion needed structural reforms, I saw an opportunity to approach without arousing suspicion." The revelation hit Helena like a punch to the stomach. "You've been watching me?" "Protecting," Ethan quickly corrected. "I never interfered in your life, never approached you. I just made sure you were well. The scholarship you received for specialization at Columbia, the apartment you managed to rent at a below-market price when you moved to Oak Ridge, some of the book donations that arrived at the library in recent years." "Were you?" Helena finished, feeling manipulated in a way she didn't know how to process. "I just wanted to make sure you had the opportunities you deserved," Ethan said, his voice laden with an urgency that made her believe in his sincerity, even as she was furious with him. "Emily made me promise I would take care of you, even if it was from a distance. It was the only way I had to honor her memory." "Her memory," Helena repeated, the words hitting her like lightning. "You speak as if she were dead." The silence that followed was laden with a weight that Helena couldn't interpret. Ethan looked at her with an expression of internal conflict, as if he were debating with himself about how much he should reveal. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but firm, "is my mother dead?" "I don't know," he finally answered. "I really don't. No. The last traces I managed to follow led to a small convent in France, but when I got there, the nuns said she had left again, not leaving information about her destination. That was 15 years ago." Helena sat heavily in the chair, feeling as if all the air had been sucked from the room. For all these years, she had kept a small flame of hope that her mother was still alive somewhere, perhaps unable to return, but at least existing. The possibility that Emily might be dead, that Helena might have lost the opportunity to ever meet her again, was devastating. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Because I couldn't stay away from you," Ethan admitted, slowly approaching the chair where she was seated. When I saw you that first morning, working so carefully on that manuscript, with the same expression of concentration that your mother had when she played the piano, I knew I wouldn't be able to simply buy the land and leave. I needed to meet you, talk to you, discover what kind of woman you had become. And now that you've discovered, Ethan knelt beside her chair, his intense blue eyes fixed on her face. I discovered that you're even more extraordinary than I expected. I discovered that you have your mother's strength, but also an independence that Emily never managed to develop. And I discovered that I'm falling in love with you in a way that is completely separate from any feeling I had for her. Helena felt her heart dangerously accelerate. It was wrong. All of it was profoundly wrong. He had loved her mother, had been part of the destruction of her family, had watched her without her knowledge for years, and yet, when he looked at her that way, when his voice carried that raw vulnerability, she felt the same intense attraction that had led her to kiss him the night before. "This is madness," she whispered. "I know," Ethan agreed, extending his hand to touch her face, but stopping centimeters from her skin, waiting for her permission. "But I can't stop." Helena closed her eyes, fighting against the conflicting impulses that pulled her in opposite directions. The rational part of her mind screamed for her to move away, to expel him from her life before he could cause even more damage. But there was another part, a deeper and more primitive part, that responded to the pain in his voice, to the sincerity in his eyes, to the promise of answers that only he could give. When she opened her eyes again, Ethan was still kneeling beside her chair, patiently waiting. Slowly, Helena covered his hand with hers, allowing him to touch her face. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Everything," Ethan responded without hesitation. "I want your trust, your forgiveness, your companionship. I want to know every thought in your head, every dream you've ever had. I want the right to protect you, not from a distance as I've done all these years, but by your side. And I want you to allow me to love you in the way I never managed to love your mother." It was too intense a declaration, too intimate for someone she had known for only 3 days, but Helena could see that he was serious, that there was a brutal sincerity in his words that made her believe he wasn't playing games. "And if I say no?" she asked. "And if I decide that this is too complicated, that you represent too much danger to the life I've built here?" Ethan was silent for a long moment, considering his response. "Then I will respect your decision," he finally said. "I'll give up buying the land, return to Atlanta, and you'll never see me again. But Helena, please don't make that decision now, not when you're still processing everything you've discovered. Give me a chance to prove that I am more than the mistakes of my past." Helena studied him, seeing in the lines of his face the evidence of a life lived with intensity, the successes and failures that had molded him into the man who was kneeling before her. There was power in him, but also vulnerability. There was confidence, but also fear. He was a complex man, carrying his own secrets and wounds, and that attracted her in a way she knew was dangerous. "One chance," she finally said, "but with conditions. Name them. No lies, even if the truth is painful. No manipulation, even if you believe it's for my own good. And no pressure. If I need space, you give me space. If I need time, you give me time." "I accept," Ethan said immediately. "And you stop this business of buying the library. Find another project, leave this place in peace." Ethan hesitated for a moment, and Helena could see the conflict in his eyes. Obviously, there was more involved in the acquisition of the land than he had revealed. "It's complicated," he finally said. "There are other interests at stake, but I'll find a way to resolve it without harming the library." Helena nodded, accepting that it would be all she would get for now. "And now?" "Now," Ethan said, standing up and extending his hand to her. "How about dinner? There's a small restaurant I discovered today away from the tourist center. We can talk more and you can ask me any questions you want about your mother, about me, about anything." Helena looked at the extended hand for a moment before accepting it. It was a step into the unknown, a movement that could complicate her life in ways she couldn't even imagine. But there was something about Ethan Lancaster, about the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, that made her want to take the risk. The restaurant that Ethan had chosen was indeed small and discreet, hidden on a side street where tourists rarely ventured. The owner, a middle-aged man with a thick southern accent, clearly knew Ethan, which made Helena wonder how long he had been planning his approach. During dinner, Helena asked questions about her mother that she had carried for 20 years without knowing that one day she would have the chance to ask. Ethan answered all of them with a brutal honesty that sometimes made her shudder. Emily had been passionate, impulsive, capable of acts of great generosity, but also of devastating selfishness. She had been unhappy in her marriage long before. Meeting Ethan, felt trapped in a diplomatic world that valued appearances above genuine emotions. "She talked about you constantly," Ethan said, cutting a piece of steak with precise movements. "Said you were the only good thing she had created, that even if she lost everything else, at least she would know she had brought something beautiful into the world." Helena felt tears stinging her eyes. "And yet she left me. She sacrificed herself for you," Ethan gently corrected. "There's a difference. Emily knew that her presence put you in danger, that your father's enemies would use any weakness against him. She chose to disappear so that you could have a chance at a normal life." "Normal," Helena repeated with a bitter laugh. 20 years jumping from town to town, from job to job, unable to form lasting relationships, because I'm always certain that people will leave me. That's normal?" Ethan extended his hand across the table, covering hers. "No. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that my selfishness, my cowardice contributed to your pain." Helena looked at their joined hands, surprised by the feeling of security that his touch provided. It was as if, for the first time in years, she wasn't facing the world completely alone. "Tell me about yourself," she said, changing the subject. "Not the business version that everyone knows, the real version." Ethan smiled, but it was a smile laden with irony. "The real version isn't very impressive. I'm a 42-year-old man who built a financial empire to compensate for the fact that I can't maintain a real relationship. I collect art not because I appreciate beauty, but because it's a safe investment. I live in an apartment in Atlanta that looks like a decoration magazine because I never bothered to make it a real home. Why? Because after Emily, I never again allowed anyone to get close enough to matter. It's easier to live on the surface of things, to go through the motions of life without really being present." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "Until now." Helena felt her heart accelerate again. There was something in the way he looked at her that made her feel as if she were the only person in the world, as if all the years of solitude and protection she had built around herself were just preparation for this moment. "Ethan," she began, but was interrupted by her phone ringing. It was Mrs. Eleanor, and there was panic in her voice. "Helena, dear, you need to come to the library immediately. Something terrible has happened. The police are here, and they're saying there was a break-in, that important documents were stolen. They want to talk to you about the materials that were in your laboratory." Helena felt her blood freeze. The diary. Someone knew about the diary. "I'll be right there," she said, hanging up the phone with trembling hands. "What happened?" Ethan asked, already getting up and signaling the waiter to bring the check. "Break-in at the library. The police want to talk to me." Helena hesitated for a moment, then decided to trust him. "Ethan, the diary is still there. If someone finds it—" "They won't find it," Ethan said, placing some bills on the table. "Let's go." The trip back to the historic center was made in tense silence. Helena could see the police lights before they even reached the library street, and her stomach contracted in anticipation. There were 3 police cars parked in front of the mansion, in addition to a fire department car and an ambulance. Mrs. Eleanor was on the sidewalk, wrapped in a blanket, talking to a police officer who was noting her words in a small notebook. "Mrs. Eleanor." Helena ran toward the old librarian. "Are you all right? What happened?" "Oh dear," Mrs. Eleanor said, grabbing her hands. "It was terrible. I had forgotten my purse and came back to get it around 9 o'clock. When I arrived, the front door was broken into. There were papers scattered everywhere, furniture overturned. Whoever did this was looking for something specific." The police officer, A young man with an impeccable uniform introduced himself as Detective Rivera. "Are you Helena Winters, the restorer?" "Yes." "We need you to examine your laboratory, see if you can identify what was taken." The break-in seems to have concentrated mainly on the second floor, specifically in the area where you work. Helena felt Ethan approach from behind, his presence reassuring even amid the chaos. "Of course, Detective. I'll check now." The laboratory was a disaster. Drawers ripped out, papers scattered, equipment knocked over. But Helena went directly to her work desk, to the drawer where she had hidden the diary. It was empty. "Did something specific disappear?" the detective asked, observing her reaction. Helena hesitated. How could she explain about the diary without revealing its origin? How could she tell about her mother's letters without exposing secrets that could destroy what remained of her family? "Some personal documents," she finally said. "Nothing of monetary value, but important to me." The detective made some notes. "Do you have any idea who might be interested in these documents?" Helena looked at Ethan, who remained silent, leaving the decision to her. It was another test of trust, she realized. He wouldn't try to influence her response, even if it could complicate things for him. "No," she lied. "I have no idea." They spent the next hour answering questions, filling out reports, inventorying the damage. Helena managed to identify some recent donations that had been taken, some rare books that had value on the black market. But she knew that those were just smoke screens. Whoever had broken into the library was after the diary and had gotten what they wanted. When they were finally free to leave, Helena was physically and emotionally exhausted. Ethan accompanied her to her door without saying a word, seeming to understand that she needed silence to process the events of the night. "Do you think it was a coincidence?" she asked when they reached her building. "No," Ethan answered without hesitation. "Someone knew about the diary, someone who didn't want you to discover its contents. But you had already given me the diary. If they wanted to prevent me from reading it, it would be too late." Ethan looked at her for a moment, as if he were assessing how much he should reveal. "Helena, there are pages missing from that diary, pages that I never managed to find. Maybe whoever stole it was looking for them, or maybe they wanted to make sure you wouldn't discover where to find them. Do you know where these pages are?" "I have some suspicions," Ethan admitted, "but I would need time to investigate, and now that someone else is involved in the game, it could be dangerous." Helena felt a shiver run down her spine. In 3 days, her life had gone from a predictable and safe routine to something that seemed like a psychological thriller. And at the center of everything was the man in front of her, who had been her mother's forbidden love and now threatened to become her own obsession. "Ethan," she said, placing her hand on his arm, "whatever happens from now on, promise me you'll be honest with me. I can't deal with more lies, more surprises." "I promise," he said, covering her hand with his. "But Helena, you need to understand that the truth can be more dangerous than lies. There are people involved in this who won't hesitate to hurt you to protect their secrets." "What people?" Ethan hesitated, clearly struggling with himself. "People who were involved in your father's corruption scandal. People who were never exposed, who built empires on the secrets that Emily discovered. The diary didn't contain just love confessions, Helena. It contained evidence that could destroy careers, fortunes, reputations." Helena felt as if the ground were moving again beneath her feet. "My mother was involved in the investigation. Your mother discovered compromising information by accident. Your father had kept her completely out of the business, but Emily had access to documents, to conversations, to details she shouldn't know. When she realized what she knew, she tried to use that information to protect Michael. And you, what was your role in all this?" "I was young, ambitious, and starting to build my financial empire. Some of my first acquisitions were financed through contracts that I didn't examine too closely." Ethan sighed, running his hand through his hair. "When I met Emily, when I fell in love with her, I made the mistake of showing some documents, of trusting her with information that could have destroyed us both." Helena processed these revelations, feeling as if each answer generated 10 new questions. "So the break-in today?" was probably organized by someone who discovered that you were investigating the past, someone who can't afford to have these secrets exposed. Ethan moved closer to her, his hands framing her face. That's why you need to let me protect you, not from a distance as I've done all these years, but up close. These people are dangerous, Helena, and now that you've become a threat. I've become a target, Helena finished, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had gotten into. Yes. Helena looked into Ethan's intense blue eyes, seeing her own vulnerability reflected in them. In 3 days, she had discovered secrets about her family that completely changed her understanding of the past, had become involved with a man who was simultaneously the answer to questions she had carried for 20 years and the key to dangers she couldn't even imagine. "Stay with me tonight," she said impulsively, the words coming out before she could censor them. Ethan studied her for a moment. "Helena, you've had a traumatic day. I don't want you to make decisions you might regret in the morning." "I won't regret it," she said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "Today I discovered that my entire life was built on secrets and lies, that my mother didn't abandon me, but sacrificed herself for me, that the man she loved spent 20 years protecting me from a distance, and that now there are people who might want to hurt me for things I don't even fully understand." She paused, breathing deeply. "If I'm going to face all that, I don't want to face it alone." Ethan kissed her then, softly but intensely, as if he were sealing a promise. It was different from the kiss of the night before. There was less physical urgency but more emotional depth, as if they were committing to something much greater than attraction. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her lips. "I'm sure," Helena responded, and for the first time in years she really was. Helena's apartment was small but cozy, with bookshelves that extended from floor to ceiling and black and white photographs of historical monuments scattered on the walls. Ethan observed each detail while she prepared tea in the kitchen, trying to decipher through the personal objects who Helena had become during all those years in which he had observed her only from a distance. There was something melancholic about the decoration, a sense of impermanence, as if she were always ready to leave at any moment. "You never allowed yourself to create real roots," he said, when Helena returned with 2 steaming cups, sitting beside him on the faded blue fabric sofa. "It's hard to create roots when you've spent your entire life learning that people disappear," Helena responded, curling her legs under her body and holding the cup with both hands as if she needed the heat. "My mother, my father, even the relatives who took me in as a child, they all eventually reached the point where I became too heavy a burden to carry." Ethan felt a sharp pang of guilt. "I should have looked for you earlier. I should have found a way to be present in your life." "Maybe," Helena said, studying his face in the soft light of the table lamp, "or maybe I needed all these years to become strong enough to deal with the truth. The 8-year-old child who lost her mother wouldn't have been able to process what I discovered today." They drank the tea in a contemplative silence, both aware of the sexual tension that grew between them, despite the traumatic circumstances of the day. Helena could feel the heat of Ethan's body beside hers, could smell the subtle scent of his cologne, mixed with something more masculine and primitive that made her want to move even closer. "Tell me about the last time you saw my mother," she finally said, needing to fill the silence before she did something impulsive. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, as if he were accessing a painful memory that he preferred to keep buried. "It was 3 days before she disappeared. We met at our usual place, a small cafe on the outskirts of Virginia where no one knew us. Emily was different, nervous in a way I had never seen before. Her hands trembled when she held the coffee cup, and she constantly looked over her shoulder, as if she expected someone to be following us." "Did she say anything about being afraid?" "She said that Michael had asked specific questions about our meetings, that he knew details that could only have come from professional surveillance. And then she told me about a phone conversation she had overheard by chance, a conversation between your father and a man she didn't recognize, but who explicitly mentioned my name and talked about solving the problem permanently." Ethan opened his eyes, looking directly at Helena. "That's when we decided it was too dangerous to continue seeing each other. But you loved each other, desperately, Ethan admitted, his voice laden with a pain that 20 years hadn't managed to diminish. She was like a fire. Helena? Intense, passionate, capable of burning you completely, but so beautiful that you couldn't move away. When I was with her, I felt as if I were truly alive for the first time in my life. Helena felt a pang of something that took a moment to recognize as jealousy. It was irrational, she knew. Emily was her mother, had been dead for years, and any relationship that Ethan had had with her belonged to the past. And yet hearing the passion in his voice when he talked about Emily made her question whether he would be capable of loving her in the same way, or if she would always be just a pale shadow of the woman who truly possessed his heart. "And now?" she asked, her voice lower than she intended. "What do you feel now?" Ethan turned on the sofa to face her directly, his intense blue eyes studying every detail of her face. "Now, I feel something completely different. Emily was fire, but you're like deep water, calm on the surface but with powerful currents underneath. Emily consumed me, but you complete me." It was a beautiful answer, poetically constructed, but Helena needed more than words. She needed to know if he really saw her as an independent person or just as a way to reconnect with the woman he had lost. "Prove it," she said simply. "What?" "Prove to me that I'm not just a substitute for her. Prove that what you feel is real, not just nostalgia or guilt disguised as love." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then put his teacup on the coffee table and leaned toward her. "How do you want me to prove that?" "By kissing me as if I were Helena," she whispered, "not as if I were Emily's daughter." The kiss that followed was different from anything Helena had experienced before. Ethan kissed her with a hunger that went far beyond the physical, as if he were trying to memorize every inch of her lips, every nuance of her response. His hands tangled in her hair, undoing the low ponytail she always wore, allowing the brown locks to fall over her shoulders. Helena felt herself melting under his touch, her body responding in a way that surprised her. It had been years since she had allowed herself to be truly vulnerable with someone, but something about Ethan broke all her carefully built defenses. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Or maybe it was the fact that he represented a connection to the past she thought she had lost forever. When they finally separated to breathe, Helena could see in his eyes a need that mirrored her own. It was dangerous, she knew. Everything about that situation was dangerous, but for the first time in years she didn't want to be prudent. "Helena," Ethan murmured against her lips, his voice hoarse with desire. "Are you sure this is what you want? I don't want you to regret it tomorrow." In response, Helena stood up from the sofa and extended her hand to him. "My bedroom is over there," she said, pointing to the dark corridor. Ethan held her hand, intertwining his fingers, and allowed himself to be led through the small apartment. Helena's bedroom was even more revealing than the living room. A twin bed covered with a simple but elegant comforter, an old desk where manuscripts were stacked in careful order, and a window that looked out onto the mountains that surrounded Oak Ridge. "It's small," Helena said, suddenly aware of how modest her life must seem compared to the world of luxury he inhabited. "It's perfect," Ethan responded, turning to face her. "It's you." This time it was Helena who initiated the kiss, pressing herself against him with an urgency that surprised her. Her hands explored the contours of his chest through the expensive cotton shirt, feeling the firm muscles beneath the fabric. Ethan moaned softly against her lips, his own hands tracing the curve of her waist, pulling her even closer. What followed was a slow and deliberate dance of discovery. Ethan unbuttoned her blouse with careful fingers, as if he were revealing a precious work of art. Helena undid the buttons of his shirt, marveling at the sensation of his warm skin under her palms. Each touch was electric, each kiss deeper than the previous one, as if they were trying to merge into a single person. When they finally lay on the narrow bed, bodies intertwined in the dimness of the room, Helena felt as if she were crossing a definitive line. It was more than sex, more than physical attraction. It was a connection that went to the core of who she was, an intimacy she didn't know was possible. Ethan touched her, as if he were memorizing every curve, every sensation, whispering her name like a prayer. Helena lost herself in the intensity of his caresses, in the way he seemed to instinctively know every sensitive point of her body. It was as if they had known each other for years, not just 3 days. Later, lying in each other's arms with their breathing still accelerated, Helena felt a peace she hadn't experienced since childhood. Ethan traced lazy circles on her bare back, his touch comforting and possessive at the same time. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice low in the darkness. "About how everything changed in such a short time," Helena answered honestly. 3 days ago I had a predictable, safe life, and now? Now I feel as if I were in the middle of a hurricane, and you are the center of it." Ethan laughed softly, a sound she felt reverberating in his chest. "Hurricanes destroy things." "Not always," Helena said, raising her head to look at him. "Sometimes they clear the air, take away everything that was stagnant and allow something new to grow. You think that's what we're doing, creating something new?" "I don't know," Helena admitted, "but I want to find out." Ethan kissed her softly, a kiss full of unspoken promises. "Then let's find out together." Helena was almost falling asleep when his phone rang. Ethan hesitated for a moment, clearly not wanting to break the intimacy of the moment, but the insistent ring eventually forced him to answer. "Lancaster," he said, his voice automatically assuming the professional tone that she was beginning to associate with his business world. Helena couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but she could see the change in Ethan's expression as the conversation progressed. His features hardened, and he sat up in bed, running his free hand through his hair in a gesture that she was learning to recognize as a sign of stress. "When?" he asked, his voice tense. "Are you sure?" "I understand. No, I'm in Oak Ridge, but I can be there in 2 hours if necessary. No, don't do anything until I arrive, nothing, you hear me?" He hung up the phone and sat in silence for a moment, clearly processing what he had heard. "What happened?" Helena asked, although part of her feared the answer. "One of my private investigators found something related to the pages missing from your mother's diary." Ethan turned to look at her, and Helena could see real concern in his eyes. "Helena, I think someone has been following you long before I appeared in Oak Ridge, and they weren't the same people who broke into the library today." Helena felt a chill run down her spine. "What does that mean?" "It means there are more players in this game than I imagined, and some of them may have been waiting for you to discover the truth about your mother, to implement some plan they've been preparing for years." Helena sat up in bed, pulling the sheet to cover her body, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. "What kind of plan?" Ethan hesitated, clearly debating how much he should reveal. "There have been rumors for years about a group of politicians and businessmen who were involved in your father's scandal, but who were never exposed. People who built fortunes and careers on the corruption schemes that destroyed Michael. If there are documents that can prove their involvement—" "They would kill me to protect their secrets," Helena finished, the reality of the situation finally crystallizing in her mind. "I won't let that happen," Ethan said firmly, turning to get his clothes. "I need to go to Richmond to meet with my investigator, see what he discovered. But first I'll arrange protection for you." "No," Helena said quickly. "I don't want guards. I don't want to feel like a prisoner in my own life. And besides, if you're right about me being watched for years, obvious security will only alert whoever is behind this." Ethan stopped dressing and looked at her with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "Helena, you don't understand the danger you're in." "I understand perfectly," she replied, getting up from the bed and starting to dress as well. "And that's exactly why I'm going with you." "Absolutely not." "Ethan," Helena said, approaching him and placing her hands on his chest, "these people, whoever they are after me because of something my mother knew. If there are documents or evidence that can expose them, I have the right to see them. It's my family, my history. It's too dangerous." "Staying here alone is also dangerous," Helena pointed out. "At least if I'm with you, we'll be facing the danger together." Ethan studied her for a long moment, clearly struggling between his protective instinct and the recognition that she had a valid point. "If I allow you to come with me, you have to promise that you'll do exactly what I say, when I say it. No questioning, no hesitating." "I promise," Helena said, although they both knew it was a promise she would probably break if the circumstances demanded. The trip to Richmond was made in tense silence. Ethan drove with intense concentration, constantly checking the rear view, mirrors to make sure they weren't being followed. Helena watched the mountainous landscape of Virginia pass by the window, her mind a confusion of contradictory emotions about the events of the last few hours. The night she had spent in Ethan's arms had been revealing in more ways than just the physical. There was a connection between them that went beyond attraction or even love. It was as if they completed each other in a fundamental way, as if they were two parts of a whole that had finally been reunited. But that same connection made them more vulnerable, gave Helena's invisible enemies an additional way to hurt her. "Do you regret it?" Ethan suddenly asked, as if he had read her thoughts. "What?" "Last night, getting involved with me knowing how complicated it was going to become." Helena considered the question carefully. It would be easier to say yes, that it had been a mistake to allow herself to become emotionally involved with a man who carried so much baggage and danger. But she couldn't lie, not to him and not to herself. "I feel as if I'm really living, not just existing." Ethan extended his free hand and intertwined their fingers, a simple gesture that conveyed more security than any words could. Ethan's private investigator met them at a discreet cafe in downtown Richmond, a small and dimly lit establishment that was clearly chosen for its ability to offer privacy. Robert Miller was a middle-aged man with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much of humanity's shadowy nature. He had worked for Ethan for more than a decade, handling investigations that required absolute discretion. "Mr. Lancaster," Robert said, standing up when they approached the table at the back of the cafe. "Ms. Winters," he added, examining Helena with professional eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail about her. "What did you discover, Robert?" Ethan asked as soon as they sat down, dispensing with formalities. Robert opened a discreet folder and took out some photographs and documents. "As you requested, I investigated Ms. Winters' movements over the last 3 years, and I discovered something interesting." He placed a photograph on the table. It was a grainy image, obviously taken with a long lens, showing Helena leaving the library in Oak Ridge. The date in the lower corner indicated that it had been taken 6 months ago. "This is just one of many," Robert continued, spreading more photographs. "Someone has been systematically documenting Ms. Winters' life since she moved to Oak Ridge, not just occasional photographs, but professional surveillance. Schedules, routes, contacts, everything." Helena felt her stomach contract as she saw the evidence that her privacy had been violated in such a systematic way. "Who?" she managed to ask. "That's where it gets interesting," Robert said, taking another document from the folder. The photographs were taken by a private investigation agency from Virginia, an agency that, according to my research, has deep connections with your father's old political circle. Ethan leaned forward, his expression becoming even more serious. "Did you manage to identify who hired the agency?" "Not directly. The payments were made through a shell company, which in turn is controlled by a trust, which is administered by another set of companies. It's a complex structure, clearly designed to hide the real client's identity." Robert paused, looking directly at Helena. "But I managed to trace the money to a source, the Michael Winters Foundation." Helena felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "A foundation with my father's name." "Established 3 years after his death," Robert confirmed. "Officially, it's a charitable organization that promotes education and culture. In practice, it seems to be a vehicle for laundering money and financing activities that its true controllers prefer to keep away from the public eye." "Who controls the foundation?" Ethan asked, although Helena suspected he already knew the answer. "A board of directors composed of 5 people. All of them were close to the circle of power when Michael Winters was arrested, and all of them emerged from the scandal not only unscathed, but significantly richer and more powerful than before." Robert took a last sheet of paper from the folder. It was a list of names that Helena didn't recognize, but that Ethan examined with an expression that became darker with each name. Senator Marcus Walker, Congressman Joseph Carter, businessman Anthony Blake, Judge Fernando Cooper, and Robert made a dramatic pause. Judge Victoria Winters Blake. Helena felt the blood freeze in her veins. Victoria Winters Blake? Your paternal aunt, Robert confirmed. Michael Winters' younger sister, currently serves on the Superior Court of Justice. Helena vaguely remembered Aunt Victoria, a cold and ambitious woman who had occasionally visited the family when she was a child. Victoria had always been critical of her father, suggesting that he was too naive for the world of politics, that he trusted the wrong people. After the scandal, she had been one of the first to publicly distance herself from Michael, declaring to the press that she was deeply disappointed with her brother's actions. "So my own aunt has been watching me all these years?" Helena asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It seems so," Robert answered, "and there's more. I gained access to the communication records of the investigation agency. In the last 6 months, there has been a significant increase in the frequency of reports about you. And in the last week, specific instructions were sent to increase surveillance and immediately report any unusual activity." Ethan's arrival in Oak Ridge, Helena understood. Exactly. Someone knew he was coming and knew that his presence would change things. Ethan picked up the photographs and studied them carefully. "Robert, you said you discovered something about the missing pages from the diary." "Yes," Robert said, his expression becoming even more serious. "Based on your descriptions and the dates of the letters you showed me, I managed to track Emily Winters' movements in the weeks before her disappearance. There are records that she visited a safe deposit box at a private bank in Virginia 3 days before she left." "What kind of safe deposit box?" "The kind you rent when you want to hide something very important. And the most interesting part, the box still exists. It has never been opened since Emily closed it." Helena felt her breathing accelerate. She left something there. Probably the pages missing from the diary, plus other documents she considered. "Too important to keep at home," Robert confirmed. "But there's a problem." "What?" "To open the box you need 2 keys. Emily took one with her when she disappeared. The other was left with someone she trusted." "Who?" Ethan asked. Robert looked directly at Helena. "According to the bank's records, the second key was left with her daughter, Helena Winters, to be claimed when she turned 25. Helena felt as if the world was spinning around her. "But I never received any key." "Because it was intercepted," Robert said somberly. "I managed to track the correspondence. The key was sent to you through a law office 3 years ago, on your 25th birthday, but according to postal records, the letter was delivered to Judge Victoria Winters Blake's house." The silence that followed was laden with implications. Helena finally understood the magnitude of the conspiracy that had surrounded her life. Her own aunt had not only participated in the destruction of her father, but had spent years watching her, waiting for the moment when she might lead to the documents that Emily had hidden. "So, Victoria has the key," she said finally. "Probably," Robert confirmed. "And considering the break-in at the library last night, someone is getting impatient to have access to what's in that safe deposit box." Ethan leaned back in his chair, processing all the information. "They know that Helena is investigating the past. They know I'm involved. And they know that eventually we'll discover about the safe deposit box." "Which means they'll act soon," Helena said, surprised by the calm in her own voice. "Either to open the box themselves or to make sure it's never opened." "Exactly," Robert agreed. "My recommendation is that you leave the country immediately. Go somewhere where you can hide until this situation resolves itself." "No," Helena said firmly. "I'm not running away again. I've spent 20 years running from shadows I didn't even know existed. If my mother left something in that box, something important enough that people are willing to kill to obtain it, then I need to see it." "Helena," Ethan began. But she interrupted him. "No, Ethan, you said you would give me the choice, that you would respect my decisions. This is my decision. I'm going to Virginia Beach. I'm going to confront my aunt, and I'm going to discover what my mother wanted me to know." Ethan studied her for a long moment, seeing the iron determination in her eyes. It was the same willpower he had seen in Emily, but tempered by a rationality that her mother had never possessed. "All right," he finally said, "but we do this my way, with planning, with precautions, and with backup in case things go wrong." Robert began to put the documents back in the folder. "Mr. Lancaster, I need to warn you about something else. My contacts in Virginia informed me that there's unusual movement among Michael Winter's old allies. Secret meetings, money transfers, hiring, additional security. They know something is happening and they're preparing." "Preparing for what?" "For a war," Robert said simply. "The secrets that Emily discovered are explosive enough to destroy careers, fortunes, entire families. They'll do anything to protect them." Helena felt a chill run down her spine, but also a growing determination. Her mother had died or disappeared protecting these secrets. Her father had been destroyed by them, and she had spent 20 years living in the shadows they created. It was time to bring everything to light. "When do we leave for Virginia Beach?" she asked. Ethan smiled, despite the gravity of the situation. It was a proud smile, full of admiration, for the courage of the woman by his side. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "but first let's make sure we're prepared for anything we might find there." As they left the cafe, Helena felt as if she were crossing another definitive line. She was no longer the woman who hid among old books, fleeing from a past she didn't understand. She was someone who was ready to face the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. And with Ethan by her side, she felt as if she could face anything. The trip to Virginia Beach was made in strategic silence. Ethan had rented a different car, a common black Civic, that would blend easily into the capital's traffic, and plotted a route that avoided the main highways, passing through smaller towns where it would be more difficult for them to be tracked. Helena watched the countryside landscape pass by the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of anxiety and determination that grew with each mile traveled toward the confrontation that would change her life forever. Robert had done his job with the efficiency of an experienced professional. During the night, Helena had received a complete dossier on Victoria Winters Blake, information that painted the portrait of a woman who had transformed her brother's downfall into an opportunity for personal ascension. Graduated in law from UVA with academic honors, Victoria had always been seen as the most ambitious daughter of the Winters family. While Michael chose the diplomatic career out of idealism and love for the country, Victoria pursued judicial power with a cold and calculating determination that took her to the top of the American legal hierarchy in record time. What most disturbed Helena, in the information, was discovering how her aunt had systematically distanced herself from the family after the scandal, not just publicly, but also financially. Victoria had refused to help with Michael's legal expenses, had avoided any association with Helena after her father's death, and had used her position in the judiciary to block investigations that could have revealed the true extent of corruption in the case. It was as if she had erased any connection to the past. That could harm her meteoric career. "You're nervous," Ethan observed, his hand finding hers on the car's center console. "Terrified would be a more accurate description," Helena admitted, intertwining her fingers with his. "For all these years, I thought I was alone in the world. To discover that I had family who simply chose to ignore me is devastating." "People like Victoria see relationships only in terms of cost and benefit," Ethan said, his voice laden with a bitterness that suggested personal experience. "For her, you represented a liability, a connection to a scandal that could harm her reputation. It was easier to pretend you didn't exist. And now you represent a much greater threat. You've grown up, become independent, and potentially have access to information that could destroy everything she's built." Ethan squeezed her hand. "That's why she's been watching you. She was waiting for you to do exactly what you're doing now." Helena processed this information, feeling a mixture of anger and determination growing in her chest. "So she knows we're coming." "Probably." Robert managed to be discreet, but Victoria has resources and connections that make it difficult to move in Virginia Beach without being detected. Ethan reduced speed as they approached the entrance to the coastal city. That's why we're going to do this in an unexpected way. The plan that Robert had elaborated was simple on the surface, but complex in the details. Instead of trying to confront Victoria in her controlled environment, the Supreme Court or her fortified house in Virginia Beach, they would intercept her in a public place where she wouldn't expect it, during a social obligation that she couldn't cancel without raising suspicions. That night, Victoria would attend a charity dinner at the Grand Beach Hotel, an annual event to raise funds for charities related to the judicial system. It was the type of occasion where her presence was not only expected but necessary to maintain her public image. Robert had obtained credentials for the event through his contacts, identifying Helena as a freelance journalist and Ethan as a businessman interested in making donations. The hotel was an icon of modern architecture in Virginia Beach, its elegant lines and carefully planned gardens creating an atmosphere of discreet power and institutional sophistication. Helena felt out of place in the black dress that Ethan had insisted she buy for the occasion, an elegant model that cost more than she earned in 2 months, but that made her blend naturally among the political and economic elite that frequented such events. "Remember the plan," Ethan murmured in her ear as they passed through the metal detector at the entrance. "You approach her as a journalist, ask some preliminary questions about charity and social justice. When she's relaxed, mention your mother's name and observe the reaction. And if she refuses to talk?" "Then I step in," Ethan said, adjusting his tie with a movement that Helena was learning to associate with him, preparing for serious business. "I have information about her investments that can make her more cooperative." The hotel's main hall was elegantly decorated with enormous floral arrangements and soft lighting that created an atmosphere of luxurious intimacy. Helena immediately identified Victoria, even though she hadn't seen her in more than 15 years. Her aunt had aged gracefully, her grey hair cut in an elegant bob, wearing a navy blue suit that radiated authority. She was surrounded by a small group of people who hung on every word she said, clearly aware of her position of power. Helena observed her for a few minutes, trying to reconcile the intimidating woman before her with the vague memories she had of the aunt who occasionally visited the family home when she was a child. There had always been something cold about Victoria, an emotional distance that contrasted with the genuine affection that Michael showed for his daughter. Now, seeing her in her natural element, Helena understood that that coldness wasn't just temperament but a deliberate choice. "Are you ready?" Ethan asked, appearing beside her with 2 flutes of champagne. "No," Helena admitted, accepting the drink although she knew she wouldn't be able to swallow a sip, "but let's do it anyway." The approach was made with the precision of a military operation. Helena waited until the group around Victoria dispersed slightly, then approached with the professional smile she had perfected during her years working in museums and libraries. "Judge Blake, I'm Helena Stewart, freelance journalist. Could I speak with you for a few minutes about the work of the Michael Winters Foundation?" Victoria's reaction was instantaneous and revealing. For a fraction of a second, her mask of composure slipped, revealing something that seemed like a mixture of shock and fear. But she recovered quickly, studying Helena with eyes that suddenly became alert and calculating. "Of course," Victoria finally said, her voice controlled but with a slight tension that only someone who knew her well could detect. "We always take pleasure in talking about our charitable work." Helena felt her heart accelerate when Victoria led her to a more reserved corner of the hall. Up close, the family resemblances were undeniable. Victoria had the same dark eyes of the Winters family, the same determined line of the jaw that Helena saw in the mirror every day. But where Helena carried an inherited melancholy, Victoria radiated a cold ambition that seemed capable of calcifying any genuine emotion. "The Michael Winters Foundation does admirable work," Helena began, taking a small recorder from her pocket and placing it on the low table between them. "Promoting education and culture in memory of a man who was controversial. Doesn't that create conflicts?" "Michael Winters made mistakes," Victoria responded carefully, each word measured. "But that doesn't erase his previous contributions to the country. The foundation honors the best of his legacy while recognizing that no one is perfect. And his family? How do they feel about the foundation using his name? Victoria hesitated for a moment, and Helena could see that she was trying to decide how much the supposed journalist knew about the family connections. Michael's family has always supported educational initiatives. I'm sure they would approve. Including his daughter. The question was asked in a casual tone, but Helena saw Victoria stiffen slightly. Helena Winters has not been available for consultations about the foundation. Have you tried to contact her? It's complicated, Victoria said, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Helena has preferred to maintain privacy on matters related to her father. Helena felt a wave of anger at the ease with which her aunt lied. 20 years of silence, 20 years of abandonment, and Victoria managed to talk about it as if it were a mutual, civilized choice. Actually, Helena said, deciding to abandon the subterfuge, I am Helena Winters. The silence that followed was charged with electricity. Victoria remained completely still for a few seconds, her features passing through a series of rapid emotions before settling into an expression of extreme caution. Helena, she finally said, her voice losing all pretense of cordiality. You grew up without help from family, Helena responded, not trying to hide the bitterness in her voice. The circumstances were complicated after your father's death. I thought it would be better for you to have a new beginning, away from the shadows of the past. Shadows that you helped create? Victoria leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about the Michael Winters Foundation being a front for money laundering. I'm talking about you using private investigators to watch me for years. And I'm talking about you intercepting correspondence that belonged to me. The accusation hit the target. Helena could see Victoria rapidly calculating her options, trying to determine exactly how much she knew and what the best response strategies were. Helena, Victoria said, her voice assuming a conciliatory tone. That didn't fool anyone. I think there are some misunderstandings about complex situations that a young person may not fully comprehend. Then explain it to me, Helena challenged. Start by explaining why you have the key to the safe deposit box that my mother left for me. The mention of the safe deposit box was like throwing a bomb into the conversation. Victoria visibly paled, her hands trembling slightly before she managed to control them. For a few seconds, it seemed as if she might faint. How did you know about the safe deposit box? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you intercepted something that didn't belong to you and used it for your own purposes for years. You don't understand the danger, Victoria said urgently, looking around to make sure they weren't being overheard. Emily hid things in the box that could destroy innocent people, ruin entire families. I was protecting you by keeping those documents away from your hands. Protecting me or protecting yourself? Before Victoria could respond, Ethan appeared. Beside the table, his presence immediately changing the dynamics of the conversation. Helena could see the immediate recognition in her aunt's eyes, followed by something that seemed like genuine terror. Ethan Lancaster, Victoria said, her voice laden with barely disguised hostility. I should have imagined you would be involved in this. Victoria, Ethan responded with glacial politeness, still as charming as ever. You know each other, Helena observed, although it wasn't really a question. We had business together in the past, Ethan said, without taking his eyes off Victoria. Business related to certain properties and investments that changed hands after Michael's scandal. Helena felt another piece of the puzzle fitting into place. You bought properties confiscated from my father. Among other things, Ethan admitted. That's how I met Emily. She was trying to recover some personal items from a house that had been seized. And you helped her, Helena said, beginning to understand the complexity of the relationships that had shaped her life. I tried, Ethan said, his expression softening slightly. But there were obstacles. Victoria laughed, but it was a Bitter sound without humor. Obstacles, that's an interesting way to describe blackmail. Blackmail? Helena looked between them, feeling that there was another layer of truth that had not yet been revealed. Your boyfriend didn't tell that part of the story, Victoria said, clearly trying to create problems between them. Didn't tell how he tried to use the information that Emily gave him to blackmail important people. How he turned her love into a tool for his own schemes. Helena felt as if she had been slapped. She looked at Ethan, seeking denial in his eyes, but found only a deep guilt that confirmed at least part of Victoria's accusation. Is it true? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Partially, Ethan admitted, his brutal honesty even in the face of the possible consequences. I was young, ambitious, and when Emily showed me some documents, I saw an opportunity to accelerate my business. But it wasn't blackmail, Helena. They were legitimate acquisitions of devalued assets. Devalued assets because you had privileged information about investigations that had not yet become public, Victoria added viciously. Helena felt the world spinning around her again. Each answer she obtained only revealed new questions, new betrayals, new layers of complexity that made her question if she would ever know the complete truth. Enough, she said firmly, standing up from the chair. Enough of games. Enough of half-truths. Enough of protection. Victoria, you're going to give me the key to the safe deposit box now, and then the three of us are going to the bank, and we're going to open that damn box so that I can finally discover what my mother wanted me to know. Helena, Victoria began, but Helena interrupted her. No, no more manipulation, no more excuses about protecting me. You've spent 20 years controlling my life from a distance, making decisions about what I should or shouldn't know. This ends now. Victoria looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time Helena saw something that seemed like genuine respect in her aunt's eyes. You really are Michael's daughter, Victoria finally said, stubborn, idealistic, and completely incapable of accepting that some truths are too dangerous to be known. Maybe, Helena agreed, but it's my choice to do this. Victoria sighed deeply, suddenly seeming older and more tired. All right, but not here, not now. There are too many people watching, too many ears. Tomorrow morning, meet me at the bank at 9 o'clock. And Helena? Yes? Prepare yourselves to discover things that may make you wish you had never opened that box. The rest of the night passed in a haze of tension and planning. Ethan had reserved a room in a discreet hotel away from the center of Virginia Beach, a place where they could discuss strategies without worrying about listening devices or surveillance. Helena spent hours asking questions about his past, about his motivations, about the choices he had made when he was younger. Do you hate me now? Ethan finally asked, when she had finished processing all the revelations of the night. Helena considered the question carefully. She was furious with him for not having told the whole truth from the beginning. She was hurt to discover that even her mother had been a victim of his ambitions. But when she looked at him, she saw a man who was clearly hating himself for what he had done, who had spent 20 years trying to compensate for youthful mistakes. I don't hate you, she finally said, but I need the whole truth, Ethan. I can't deal with more surprises about who you really are. You want the complete truth? Ethan asked, his voice laden with a vulnerability she had never heard before. Yes. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that she was learning to associate with difficult confessions. When I met Emily, she was desperate, not just emotionally but financially. Michael had been arrested, all the family's assets were frozen, and she had no resources to hire decent lawyers or even keep you in a private school. She came to me not just out of love, Helena, but because I represented a form of survival. Helena felt her stomach contract, and you took advantage of that. In the beginning, yes, Ethan admitted. I saw a beautiful and desperate woman who had access to valuable information. I thought I could help her financially in exchange for some business favors. It was a transaction, nothing more. And later. Later, I fell in love with her. Really, completely, in a way I had never experienced before. And when that happened, I tried to undo the damage I had caused. I offered her a new life, away from Virginia, away from all the corruption and politics. I wanted her to bring you and, for us to start over as a family, and she refused. She said she couldn't drag you into a life built on the mistakes of the past, that you deserve to grow up clean, without the shadows of her sins and mine. Ethan looked directly at Helena. That's when I understood that Emily wasn't just the woman I loved, but also the best person I knew, and that I deserved neither her nor you. Helena processed this information, feeling a confused mixture of anger, sadness, and something that could be understanding. "And now?" she asked. "What do you want from me now?" "I want the chance to be the man I should have been 20 years ago," Ethan said simply. "I want to protect you, not out of guilt or nostalgia, but because you've become the most important person in my life. And I want you to allow me to spend the rest of my days trying to make up for the mistakes I made with your family." It was a beautiful statement, but Helena knew that words were easy. Actions were what mattered. "Prove it," she said, echoing the challenge she had made days before. "How?" "Tomorrow when we open that box, whatever we find there, promise that you'll stand by my side. No matter if the information can harm you, no matter if I decide to make it public, no matter the consequences. Promise that this time you'll choose to do the right thing even if it costs everything you've built." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and Helena could see that he understood exactly what she was asking. It was more than a promise of support. It was a test of character that would determine if they had any future together. "I promise," he finally said, "even if it means losing your fortune, your reputation, your freedom." Even then. Helena nodded, feeling as if she had finally managed to see through all the layers of complexity to find the real man underneath. Perhaps he was capable of growing beyond the mistakes of the past. Perhaps they deserved a chance. The next morning, they arrived at the bank 15 minutes before the arranged time. It was a discreet building in the banking sector of Virginia Beach, the type of institution that served clients who valued privacy above all. Victoria was already waiting, dressed professionally in a grey suit that made her look older and more severe than the night before. "Did you bring lawyers?" she asked as soon as she saw them. "Why would we need lawyers?" Helena responded. "Because depending on what's in that box, you may need legal representation very quickly." The process of opening the box was surreally bureaucratic for something that Helena had built in her mind as a moment of epic revelation. Signatures were verified, documents were examined, and finally they were led to a small and private room where the safety deposit box awaited them. Victoria took a small key from her purse, hesitating for a moment before handing it to Helena. "Last chance to change your mind," she said. "No," Helena responded firmly, inserting the key into the first lock. The second key, the one that Emily had taken with her, had been found by Robert through methods that Helena preferred not to question. When both keys turned and the box opened with a soft click, Helena felt as if she were about to discover the secret of the universe. Inside the box were 3 items: a thick envelope sealed with red wax, a small black leather diary different from the one that Ethan had given her, and an ornate jewelry box. Helena took the envelope first, breaking the seal with fingers that trembled slightly. Inside were documents that made her blood freeze, signed contracts, bank transfers, and photographs that showed secret meetings between people she recognized from newspaper headlines. "My God," she whispered, leafing through the papers. "What is it?" Ethan asked, trying to see over her shoulder. "Evidence that the corruption scheme was much bigger than anyone imagined, and that my father—" She paused, barely able to believe what she was reading. "My father wasn't being investigated because he was guilty. He was being investigated because he discovered the scheme and threatened to expose it." Victoria paled. "Helena, you don't understand the implications of what you're reading." "I understand perfectly," Helena responded, her voice gaining strength. As she continued reading, "I understand that my father was murdered to silence him. I understand that you and your friends built empires on the crimes for which he was blamed. And I understand that my mother discovered all this, and that's why she had to disappear." She opened the diary, finding the pages missing from the first one, pages that detailed not only Emily's relationship with Ethan, but also her growing awareness of the conspiracy that surrounded her family, and finally, in the last entry of the diary, Helena found the truth she had sought for 20 years. They're going to kill Michael tomorrow. They've arranged for it to look like suicide in prison, but I know the truth, and they know that I know. I have to leave. I have to protect Helena. But first, I have to leave evidence so that one day she can avenge her father and clear his name. E promises to help me, but I no longer trust anyone. If something happens to me, I hope Helena is strong enough to finish what Michael started. Helena closed the diary, her hands trembling with a mixture of anger and determination she had never felt before. "They killed my father," she said, her voice low but laden with an icy fury. "And you covered it up for 20 years. Helena," Victoria began, but Helena interrupted her. "No, it's over. All the secrets, all the lies, all the manipulation, this is going to become public. Every document, every proof, every name. I'm going to clear my father's name and destroy everyone who participated in the conspiracy." "You don't understand what you're doing," Victoria said desperately. "These people are dangerous. They killed Michael, made Emily disappear. What do you think they'll do to you?" "I don't care," Helena responded. "For 20 years I've lived in fear of shadows I didn't even know existed. Now that I know the truth, I'm not going to live in hiding anymore." That's when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, the voice on the other end made her freeze. "Helena Winters," said a male voice, cold and controlled. "You have something that belongs to us. Who are you?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you must be feeling very proud of yourself right now, thinking you've discovered great secrets. But what you've really discovered is that some truths have a very high price." Helena looked at Ethan and Victoria, seeing the fear in both their eyes. "What do you want?" she asked. "We want you to close that box, leave the bank, and forget everything you saw today. In exchange, we'll allow you to continue living your quiet life in Oak Ridge." "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll discover exactly what happened to your mother, and this time there won't be a place in the world where you can hide." The call ended, leaving Helena looking at the phone with a mixture of terror and determination. "They know where we are," Ethan said, already moving toward the... "Of course they know," Victoria said bitterly. "Did you really think you could open that box without being detected? There are very powerful people who have spent 20 years waiting for this moment." Helena looked at the documents in her hands, then at the still open box, and finally at the two people who had shaped her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Then they'll have to kill us too," she said calmly, "because I'm not giving up now." It was a declaration of war, and everyone in the room knew it. The question now was whether they would survive long enough to win. The silence in the bank's safe deposit room was deafening after the telephone threat. Helena could hear her own heart beating as she methodically put all the documents from the box in her bag, her hands surprisingly steady despite the terror she felt growing in her chest. Ethan constantly checked his watch and looked toward the door, mentally calculating escape routes and possible threats. Victoria had completely paled and seemed about to faint. "Helena, you don't understand," Victoria whispered urgently. "These people, Senator Walker, Judge Cooper, Anthony Blake, they aren't just corrupt politicians. They're people who have built an empire of power that extends throughout the country. They have resources, connections, and won't hesitate to eliminate any threat." "Then why did you ally yourself with them?" Helena asked, closing her bag with a decisive movement. "Why did you betray your own brother?" "Because it was survive or die with him," Victoria responded, tears finally escaping her eyes. "When Michael discovered the scheme and threatened to expose everything, they gave me a choice: join them or be destroyed along with him. I chose cowardice." Ethan approached the window of the small room and looked discreetly through the blinds. "There are 2 black cars parked across the street that weren't there when we arrived, and at least 4 men in suits who are clearly not bank clients." Helena felt adrenaline running through her veins, mixed with an iron determination that surprised her. For 20 years she had fled from shadows she didn't even know existed. Now that she finally knew the truth, she wasn't going to hide again. "Is there an emergency exit?" she asked the bank employee who had remained discreetly near the door during the entire process. "Yes, ma'am. In the basement, it connects with the parking lot of the building next door." "Victoria," Helena said firmly, "you're going to leave through the front. You're going to walk normally to your car and return home, act as if nothing happened. And you? We're going to use the emergency exit, if they follow us at least. You'll be out of immediate danger." Victoria hesitated, clearly divided between the relief of escaping the situation and some vestige of family conscience. "Helena, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but forgive me for everything, for having abandoned you, for having betrayed Michael, for having been a coward when I should have been strong." Helena looked at her aunt, seeing in her no longer the intimidating figure of power she had imagined for years, but a woman broken by the weight of her own choices. "You can redeem yourself," she said. "If something happens to us, make sure these documents reach the press. Don't let my father be remembered as a criminal, when in reality he was a hero." Victoria nodded, trying to recover some of the composure that had taken her to the top of the American judiciary. "I'll do that. I promise." The escape from the bank was like an action movie sequence that Helena never imagined she would live in real life. They went down service corridors, up emergency stairs, and emerged in the parking lot of the neighboring building as if they were executives leaving a morning meeting. The Civic that Ethan had rented was parked 3 blocks away, a precaution that now proved essential. "Where to now?" Helena asked when they were finally in the car, Ethan driving with precision through the morning traffic of Virginia Beach. "To a safe place where we can analyze these documents properly and decide the next step," Ethan responded, constantly checking the rearview mirrors. "No," Helena said firmly. "We're not going to hide again. These documents are going to become public today now. Helena, we need a strategy. If we simply hand everything to the press without adequate protection, they'll kill us before the story is published. Then, we ensure that the story is published from multiple sources simultaneously," Helena said, taking out her phone. "Is Robert still in Richmond?" "Yes, but Helena, call him. Tell him I want copies of these documents sent to all the major newspapers in the country, to the federal prosecutor's office, to international human rights organizations, to everyone who can give visibility to the story. I want it to be impossible to suppress this." Ethan studied her as he drove, amazed by the transformation he had witnessed. The shy and reserved woman he had met at the Oak Ridge Library had become a force of nature, driven by a mixture of justice and vengeance that was both inspiring and frightening. "Are you sure about this? Once these documents become public, there's no going back. Your life will change forever." "My life already changed forever the moment you appeared at the library," Helena responded. "The difference is that now I have control over what happens next." They spent the morning in a small hotel on the outskirts of Virginia Beach, scanning documents, making copies, and coordinating with Robert a disclosure strategy that would ensure maximum visibility and protection. Helena moved with an efficiency that surprised even herself, as if all the years of meticulous organization at the library had prepared her for this moment of controlled chaos. It was while scanning one of the last pages of Emily's diary that Helena found something that made her stop abruptly. "Ethan," she said, her voice strange, "look at this." The last entry in the diary wasn't in Emily's handwriting. It was a different masculine handwriting, and it was dated just 6 months ago. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means Helena finally found the documents. I'm alive, hidden in a monastery, in the mountains of Montana. It was the only way to protect our daughter. The man you loved, Ethan Lancaster, is not who you think. He was working for them from the beginning. Be careful. Father Matthew Sanders, Michael Winters." Helena felt as if the world were crumbling around her again. "My father is alive." Ethan read the message over her shoulder, his expression passing through shock, confusion, and then something that seemed like genuine pain. "Helena, I swear by everything sacred, I didn't know. I thought your father had died in prison like everyone else. But the message says you were working for them from the beginning." "That's not true," Ethan said desperately. "Yes, initially. I used information that Emily gave me for some business, but I was never part of the conspiracy. I never knew they planned to kill Michael. Helena wanted to believe him, but the discovery that her father was alive, hidden for 20 years, mixed with the accusation in the message, made her question everything again. "How can I be sure?" she asked, hating the vulnerability in her own voice. Ethan knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Because if I were one of them, Helena, you would already be dead. I had 1,000 opportunities to hurt you, to hand you over to them, to prevent you from discovering the truth. Instead, I helped you get here." It was a logical argument, but Helena had learned that logic doesn't always prevail when it comes to conspiracy and betrayal. "Prove it," she said once more. "How?" "Let's go to Montana, let's find my father, and let's discover the truth once and for all." Ethan hesitated. "Helena, that's madness. Leaving the country now when they're looking for us is like painting a target on our backs." "So you won't come with me?" The question carried the weight of an ultimatum, and they both knew it. It was the final test of Ethan's loyalty, the definitive proof of his intentions. "Of course I will," he said without hesitation. "But first, let's make these documents public. If something happens to us in Montana, at least the truth about what happened in Virginia will already be exposed." In the day. The following hours, Helena watched her life become national headlines. Robert had done his job with the efficiency of an experienced professional, and the country's main newspapers were simultaneously publishing the story of the scandal that had destroyed Michael Winters 20 years before. The headlines were devastating. "Diplomat murdered to silence corruption report. Supreme Court judge involved in conspiracy to cover up murder. Diplomat's daughter reveals documents that expose corruption network." Victoria kept her word, Ethan observed, watching a press conference where the judge publicly renounced her position and promised to fully cooperate with the investigations. Helena felt a somber satisfaction seeing the men who had destroyed her family being exposed and arrested live on television. But there was something incomplete in the victory. Her father was alive, and she needed to see him. The trip to Montana was organized with the help of Robert and some international contacts that Ethan had cultivated over the years. They flew to Missoula, using passports that Helena preferred not to question about their origin, and from there took a small plane to a town in the mountains near the Canadian border. The monastery was located in an isolated valley, surrounded by mist-covered mountains that created an almost mystical atmosphere. It was the type of place where someone could completely disappear from the world, living a simple and contemplative life away from any danger. Father Matthew Sanders, who had been Michael Winters, received them at the monastery gate. Helena recognized him immediately, despite the 20 years that had passed and the brown cassock he wore. He had aged, his hair now completely white, and his face marked by the lines of time and suffering. But the eyes were the same, those gentle eyes she remembered from her childhood. "My little girl," was all he managed to say before enveloping her in an embrace that carried 2 decades of longing and pain. Helena cried in the arms of the father she thought she had lost forever, feeling as if a wound she had carried all her life was finally beginning to heal. When they finally separated, Michael looked at Ethan with an expression that mixed distrust and curiosity. "You're Ethan Lancaster?" It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "The man who loved my wife?" "Yes, sir, and the man who loves your daughter." Michael studied Ethan for a long moment, as if he were trying to see through all the layers of complexity to find the fundamental truth about his intentions. "Emily told me about you before she died," he finally said. The air left Helena's lungs at once. "She's dead?" "She died 5 years ago of cancer. She spent the last months of her life here at the monastery, being cared for by the sisters." Michael paused, his features softening. "She talked about you every day, Helena, and about you too." "Ethan, she said you had truly fallen in love with her, that you weren't part of the conspiracy as I suspected. You wrote that message in the diary to test me." Ethan understood. "I wanted to see how you would react when confronted with the possibility that Helena might doubt you. A man with bad intentions would have used the situation to manipulate her. You chose to bring her here so she could discover the truth for herself. Helena felt simultaneously relieved and devastated. Relief at discovering that Ethan had passed the final test, devastation at knowing that her mother had died, without them being able to reconcile. "Did she forgive me?" Helena asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "She never had anything to forgive," Michael responded gently. "Emily sacrificed herself to protect you. There was nothing that needed forgiveness. But I blamed her all these years. I thought she had abandoned me out of selfishness." "And she knew you would think that," Michael said. "It was the price she was willing to pay to keep you safe. But Helena, you need to know that she died in peace, knowing that you had become a strong and independent woman." They spent the rest of the day talking, filling in 20 years of gaps, processing revelations and finding ways to heal old wounds. Michael told about his escape from prison, organized by loyal friends who discovered the plan to assassinate him, about the years hiding, changing identity, finally finding peace in religious life, about Emily arriving at the monastery 6 years later, sick and exhausted, but determined to protect the secrets that could destroy their enemies. "She made me promise that if something happened to her, I would find a way to make you discover the truth when you were ready," Michael said. "I think she knew that Ethan would eventually come looking for you." "How did she know?" Helena asked. "Because she knew him better than he knew himself," Michael responded, looking at Ethan. "She knew that a man capable of loving with the intensity that you loved her wouldn't be able to simply move on, that eventually you would try to find a way to redeem yourself." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, Helena felt as if she finally had all the pieces of the puzzle of her life. Her father was alive. Her mother had died loving her. Those responsible for the destruction of her family were being punished, and the man by her side had proven his loyalty in every possible way. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you choose," Michael responded. "You can stay here with me, live a simple and safe life away from all the complexity of the world, or you can return to Virginia and build something new on the foundations that you created by exposing the truth." Helena looked at Ethan, seeing in him no longer the mysterious and dangerous man who had appeared in her library, but her partner, in every sense of the word. Someone who knew her completely and loved her, not despite her scars, but because of the strength they represented. "I want to go back," she said. "I want to rebuild the library in Oak Ridge, transform it into a center for historical research. I want Michael Winter's name to be remembered not as a criminal, but as the hero he truly was. And I want to do this with Ethan." Michael smiled, and it was a smile full of paternal pride. "Then you have my blessing, but promise me one thing. Anything. Promise me that this time, when you build something together, it will be based on the complete truth. No secrets, no lies, no games. Life is too short and precious to waste with anything less than absolute honesty." "I promise," Helena said, extending her hand to Ethan, who took it without hesitation. "I promise too," Ethan added. That night, under a starry sky in the mountains of Montana, Helena and Ethan made love with an intensity that went far beyond the physical. It was a celebration of survival, a promise of future, a union of two souls that had passed through fire and emerged stronger. In each other's arms, with the sound of the monastery bells echoing softly in the valley below, they planned a life that would honor both the past and the future. 6 months later, Helena stood in the garden of the rebuilt Oak Ridge Library, observing the inauguration ceremony of the Michael Winters Center for Historical Research. The colonial mansion had been lovingly restored, maintaining its historical charm, but incorporating modern technology that would allow researchers from around the world to access the digitized archives. Ethan approached from behind, embracing her waist with a movement that had become natural and comforting. "Regrets?" he asked, observing the crowd of journalists, academics, and authorities who had come for the inauguration. "Never," Helena responded, leaning against him. "It's exactly as it should be." Media attention had been intense in the months following. The exposure of the conspiracy. Helena had become a public figure against her will, invited to give lectures on political corruption and social justice, but she had learned to use this platform to honor the memory of her parents and promote the causes she believed in. Ethan had liquidated much of his controversial business, donating significant amounts to charitable organizations and transforming his company into a force for social good. It had been a painful process, both financially and emotionally, but he repeatedly said it was the price he was willing to pay for a life built on solid foundation. "Mrs. Lancaster," said a voice behind them. Helena turned, still not accustomed, to the name she had assumed after the discreet civil wedding they had 2 weeks before. It was Robert, now working as security director for the research center. "A letter arrived for you," he said, handing an envelope with a red wax seal. It was delivered by a man who said he was from the monastery in Montana. Helena carefully opened the envelope, immediately recognizing her father's handwriting. "My dear daughter, Emily appeared to me in a dream last night. She said she's proud of what you've built together, and that she can finally rest in peace knowing that the truth has been revealed. She also said to tell you that you inherited her strength, but that you've developed a wisdom she never had. Use that wisdom well. With all my love and pride, Dad." Helena carefully folded the letter, feeling a deep peace spreading through her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt as if she belonged exactly where she was, surrounded by people who loved her and involved in work that had real meaning. "What was it?" Ethan asked. "A blessing," Helena responded, turning to kiss him under the Virginia sun. As the day progressed and the inauguration ceremony transformed into a celebration, Helena reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. She had begun as a woman hidden among old books, fleeing from a past she didn't understand. Now she was a woman who had faced the truth in all its painful complexity and emerged stronger. There was true love in her life, the kind of love that survives impossible tests and deepens with each revelation. There was purpose in her work, a way to honor both the past and the future. And there was peace, finally, the peace that comes from knowing that the secrets have been revealed, that justice has been done, and that her personal story finally makes sense. When the sun set over Oak Ridge that night, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink that reflected in the colonial windows of the library, Helena knew she had found her home. Not just a place, but an entire life built on love, truth, and the courage to face any storm that might come. In Ethan's arms, surrounded by the work she loved and honoring the memory of the parents she finally completely understood, Helena Winters, Lancaster had found something she had sought all her life without knowing. She had found herself. And for the first time since the 8-year-old child who lost her mother on a cold winter morning, Helena was truly home.